The Roman Empire lasted 1,000 years. Its economy collapsed in less than a century, and the 5 financial mistakes that destroyed the most powerful civilization in history are being repeated right now. By your government, by your central bank, and probably by you. These aren't ancient lessons, they're warnings written in silver and blood, and we're ignoring every single one of them. Rome didn't fall because of barbarians. It fell because it broke the laws of money. Laws that don't care about empires, elections, or excuses. The Romans learned these rules the hard way, through inflation that made coins worthless, through debt that enslaved generations, and through monetary decisions that seemed brilliant right up until they triggered collapse. And here's what should terrify you. We're following their playbook step by step, as if economic history is a suggestion instead of a sentence. Let's be clear about something. When Rome was at its peak in the 2nd century, it controlled more wealth than any civilization before it. 60 million people, one currency, trade routes from Britain to India. The denarius coin was trusted everywhere, more stable than most currencies today. Roman engineers built aqueducts that still stand. Roman roads still form the basis of European highways. These were not primitive people making simple mistakes. They were sophisticated, educated, and convinced they had figured out how to make an empire run forever. They were wrong. And the specific ways they were wrong are the exact ways we're wrong right now. Rule 1. Currency debasement always looks like a solution until it becomes the crisis. In the year 64, Emperor Nero faced a problem every government eventually faces. He needed more money than he had. Rome's endless wars, massive construction projects, and bureaucratic machine demanded constant funding. Raising taxes was politically dangerous. Cutting spending was unthinkable. So Nero found a third option, the option every desperate government eventually chooses. He debased the currency. The denarius had been 98% pure silver for over 2 centuries. Nero reduced it to 90%. He melted down existing coins, added base metal, and re-stamped them. Suddenly, the empire had more coins in circulation. Problem solved. Except it wasn't solved. It was just delayed. Because here's the trap. Currency debasement works brilliantly in the short term. The government gets more money to spend. The economy feels stimulated. Citizens see more coins and think they're richer. But you cannot create real wealth by diluting money. You can only redistribute it from savers to the state, from future generations to present consumption, from the careful to the reckless. Within decades, every emperor was debasing further. By the year 200, the denarius was 50% silver. By 270, it was less than 5%. What started as Nero's clever trick became Rome's death spiral. And before you think this is ancient history with no modern relevance, ask yourself, what is quantitative easing? What is expanding the money supply? What is it called when central banks create trillions in new currency during a crisis? It's called stimulus. It's called monetary policy. But mechanically, it's the same process Nero started, creating more monetary units and pretending that expansion equals wealth. The method has changed from melting coins to pressing computer keys, but the outcome is identical. You cannot print prosperity. You can only print inflation and call it something else. The Romans knew this was dangerous. Their philosophers warned about it. Pliny the Elder documented the debasement and predicted disaster. But warnings don't stop governments that need money now and believe they can manage the consequences later. They never can. The trap closes slowly, then suddenly. And when it does, it doesn't just destroy wealth, it destroys trust in every institution that relied on currency as a foundation. Rule 2. When you spend borrowed money long enough, you stop being able to tell the difference between wealth and debt. Roman debt wasn't like modern debt. It was personal, brutal, and often permanent. A Roman citizen who borrowed money and couldn't repay could be sold into slavery, not as punishment, but as settlement. His labor became the property of his creditor. His freedom was collateral. And yet, Romans borrowed constantly. They borrowed to buy land, to fund political campaigns, to maintain appearances. By the late Republic, debt had become so widespread that entire social classes were trapped in it. Julius Caesar understood this better than anyone. When he rose to power in 49 BC, one of his first political moves was partial debt cancellation. Not because he was merciful, because he was strategic. Debt relief bought him loyalty from a population drowning in obligations. It also bought him enemies among the creditor class, but by then he had legions backing him. Debt, Caesar understood, wasn't just an economic tool. It was a political weapon, and whoever controlled debt controlled the population. The empire that followed Caesar's dictatorship never escaped this trap. Imperial Rome ran on borrowed time and borrowed money. The state borrowed to fund armies. Citizens borrowed to survive. Provinces were taxed into ruin to service debt obligations, and every generation was born owing more than the last. The system worked as long as expansion continued, as long as new conquests brought new slaves, new mines, new revenue. But once expansion stopped, the debt didn't. It compounded. And compound debt in a stagnant economy is a slow poison with no antidote. Now look around. How much of the modern economy runs on debt, consumer debt, corporate debt, government debt? The entire financial system is structured so that almost everyone owes almost everything to someone else. We call it credit. We call it leverage. We call it growth. But functionally, it's the same trap Rome fell into. A system where wealth is borrowed from the future and spent in the present, and where each generation inherits not prosperity, but obligations. The Romans enslaved debtors. We enslaved them to payments. The chains are invisible, but they're no less real. Rule 3. Luxury becomes need. Need becomes expectation, and expectation destroys empires. Early Rome valued simplicity. Farmers who became senators returned to their fields after service. Soldiers wore practical armor, not decorations. Excess was seen as weakness, a corruption of Roman virtue. The Senate even passed laws limiting displays of wealth, how much jewelry a woman could wear, how many courses a banquet could serve. They understood that once luxury becomes normal, restraint becomes impossible. But once Rome started conquering wealthy civilizations, Greece, Egypt, Carthage, everything changed. Suddenly, gold flowed into Rome by the ton. Silk arrived from China, spices from India, exotic animals for gladiatorial games, and the Roman elite developed a taste they could never unlearn. Senators competed to outspend each other. Dinners featuring thousands of oysters, imported game birds, wine aged for decades. They stopped seeing this as decadence. They saw it as status, as culture, as what Romans deserved for being Roman. The philosopher Seneca watched this transformation with horror. He wrote that Rome's greatest victories became its defeats, not on the battlefield, but in the marketplace. Conquering wealthier nations made Romans want to live like them. And once you make comfort your identity, you cannot reverse it without revolution. By the 2nd century, Rome had a massive trade deficit with Asia. Roman silver poured east to pay for luxury goods that produced nothing, employed no one, and vanished the moment they were consumed. The empire was bleeding wealth not to enemies, but to its own appetite. Does this sound familiar? It should. Modern Western economies import far more than they export. We buy goods made elsewhere, consuming more than we produce, and we finance it with debt and monetary expansion. We call it trade. We call it consumer choice. But structurally, it's the same pattern Rome followed. An empire living beyond its means, sustained by borrowing and currency manipulation, convinced that the party can last forever because it always has, until it doesn't. Rule 4. Once inflation destroys savings, it destroys the middle class. Once it destroys the middle class, it destroys civilization. For centuries, the Roman middle class, merchants, landowners, artisans, were the empire's foundation. They paid taxes, served in the legions, and believed in the system because the system worked for them. They saved in silver denarii, knowing that those coins would hold value for their children and grandchildren. That wasn't naive optimism. It was based on centuries of monetary stability. But when the emperors started debasing currency, they destroyed that foundation. A merchant who saved 1,000 denarii over a lifetime found them worth a fraction of their original value within a generation. The silver content dropped, but prices rose to compensate. Bread that cost 1 denarius suddenly cost 10, then 50, then 100. Savings evaporated. The reward for thrift became the punishment for trusting the state. The middle class didn't vanish immediately, it eroded. Families who had been comfortable became struggling. Struggling families became desperate, and desperate people stopped believing in empires. They stopped paying taxes. They stopped serving in armies. They retreat into survival mode, hoarding what they can and trusting no one. By the 4th century, the Roman middle class had effectively ceased to exist. Society split into the very rich, who owned land and could survive any crisis, and the very poor, who owned nothing and had nothing to lose. This wasn't a side effect of inflation. This was its purpose. Inflation is a wealth transfer mechanism. It moves value from those who save to those who control money creation. It rewards debtors and punishes creditors. It helps governments by shrinking the real value of their debts while making citizens poorer in ways they don't immediately recognize. And once the middle class is gone, you don't have a civilization anymore. You have an aristocracy ruling over peasants, held together by force instead of consent. Every inflationary crisis in history follows this pattern. Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Argentina. The currency collapses, the middle class is wiped out, and society fractures into those who own real assets and those who own nothing. The Roman pattern isn't unique, it's universal. And if you think it can't happen in modern developed nations, you're ignoring what's already happening. Wages stagnate while asset prices soar. Home ownership becomes unattainable. Savings accounts lose purchasing power every year. The middle class isn't disappearing by accident, it's disappearing by design. Rule 5. When people stop believing in money, they stop believing in government. When they stop believing in government, the empire is already over. By the 4th century, the Roman denarius was so worthless that the state had to collect taxes in grain instead of coins. Soldiers demanded payment in land or goods, refusing currency they knew was garbage. Merchants stopped pricing goods in money. They bartered, traded, and ignored imperial decrees about legal tender. The money had become fiction, and everyone knew it. This is the final stage of monetary collapse. Not when the currency loses value, but when it loses meaning. When people refuse to use it, when they treat official money as worthless paper while trading in alternatives, the government has lost something more fundamental than revenue. It has lost legitimacy. Because money isn't just economic, it's a shared belief system. It says, we all agree this thing has value, and we trust the institution behind it. When that belief dies, the institution dies with it. Rome tried to force compliance. Diocletian issued his edict on maximum prices, a massive decree that fixed the price of everything from grain to labor, enforceable by execution. It failed completely. You cannot legislate trust. You cannot execute your way out of inflation. Markets went underground. The black market thrived. The official economy became a hollow shell. And when the barbarian tribes finally arrived, they didn't conquer Rome. They just walked into the ruins left by monetary collapse. This is how empires end, not with invasions, but with erosion. Not with war, but with broken promises. The Romans didn't lose to stronger enemies. They lost to their own financial delusions. They thought they could debase currency forever, borrow without consequence, consume without producing, and maintain an empire on the fiction that money was whatever they declared it to be. They were wrong. And the barbarians who replaced them didn't have to be smarter or stronger. They just had to wait. Now let's talk about the empire you're living in right now. The United States dollar is the world's reserve currency, trusted globally the way the denarius once was. But reserve status isn't permanent. It's earned through stability, maintained through discipline, and lost through the exact mistakes Rome made. Right now, the US runs trillion-dollar deficits annually. The money supply has expanded by trillions in recent years. Inflation is called transitory until it isn't. Debt grows faster than the economy, and every solution proposed involves more of what caused the problem: more spending, more borrowing, more monetary creation. This isn't speculation. This is pattern recognition. The denarius became worthless. The Roman middle class was destroyed. The empire collapsed into fragments, and every warning sign Rome ignored is flashing red in the modern world. The difference is that Rome had centuries to fall. Modern financial systems move at digital speed. What took Rome 200 years could take us 20, or 2. So what do you do with this knowledge? You stop pretending that currency is wealth. You recognize that savings in a depreciating currency is a losing strategy. You understand that governments will always choose inflation over default, debasement over discipline, because the political cost of honesty is higher than the long-term cost of collapse, and you position yourself accordingly. Real assets, productive capacity, skills that create value regardless of what the currency does. The Romans who survived didn't survive by trusting the denarius. They survived by owning things that couldn't be debased: land, tools, knowledge. The Roman money trap isn't ancient history, it's current events. The only question is whether you see it while there's still time to act, or whether you'll be one of the people holding worthless coins, wondering how an empire that seems so strong could fall so fast. History doesn't repeat, but if you ignore its lessons, it will crush you all the same. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and here at Time Locked Finance, we show you where to look.